The captain never looked at me. That was the part I kept later, when everything else had rearranged itself. Not the color leaving his face, not the sound the room made. The part I kept was that a man could stand 9 feet from a person and give her an order about coffee without once lifting his eyes to see who she was. It was 5:40 in the morning, and the briefing theater was cold, the way rooms are cold, before the people who will fill them arrive. I had come in early. I always come in early. There is a version of me that learned a long time ago that the room tells you the truth before it fills up, and I have never stopped listening for it. So I was standing near the back with a steel thermos in my hand, in a utility uniform that had been washed too many times, my rank sewn on in the low-contrast thread the field uniform uses, the kind you have to actually look at to read. Captain Wesley Tarrant did not look at it. He was at the podium with the laptop open and the projector throwing a blue rectangle onto the screen, and he was in the particular hurry of a young officer who has been handed a room and wants everyone to know it is his. He glanced up just far enough to register that a woman he did not recognize was standing where he had decided the important people would stand. "Coffee's your job, not the front row," he said. "2 urns, back table, then wait outside until we're set." I want to be fair to him, because fairness is the only thing that makes the rest of this worth telling. He was not cruel. Cruelty would have been easier to answer. He was certain, which is a different thing and a worse one. He had built a picture of the morning in his head, and in that picture, the unfamiliar woman in the worn uniform was the support the higher headquarters sends to prep a room, and the picture was so complete that my actual rank could sit 6 inches from his eyes and not disturb it. A first lieutenant near the front laughed. His name was Neil Barrett, and I would learn later that he laughed the way a man laughs at a joke his boss has made, not because it was funny, but because laughing was the safe thing to do. 2 other officers, settling into the second row with their own coffees, smiled into their cups. The smile traveled. That is how it works in a room. One certain man decides who you are, and the room agrees with him because agreeing is easy, and looking closer is work. I had written the operation Captain Tarrant was about to brief. Every slide in that blue rectangle had come out of my planning cell. The infiltration timeline was mine. The contingency he would read aloud in an hour was on page 11 because I had put it there, at 3 in the morning, 6 weeks earlier because I did not trust the obvious approach. In 2 hours, I would command the men and women who flew it. I set my thermos down on the back table, next to the urn I had been told to fill, and I did not say any of that. Not yet. There is a discipline to not saying things, and it is not the discipline of weakness, it is the discipline of a person who has learned that the truth lands harder when the room has finished telling its lie. So I filled the urn. I found the paper cups in the cabinet under the table where the support they had imagined would have found them, and I stacked them in their little tower, and I did it without hurry, because hurry would have been a kind of argument, and I was not ready to argue. Behind me, the room began to fill. I heard the door and boots and the low talk of people who have been awake a while, and under all of it, the small electronic hush of the secure radio warming up on the side console. I looked at the clock on the wall. It read 5:44. At 600 hours, a voice I knew was going to come over that radio and ask a question, and the answer to the question was standing at the back table stacking cups. I had 16 minutes. I let them run. Let me take you back a little first, because the coffee and the cups and the careful stack only make sense if you understand who is stacking them, and I would rather you knew that before the captain did. 3 hours earlier, the planning tent had been the only lit thing on that end of the staging base. I had been awake since 3, which was not unusual because the night before, an operation is not a night you sleep through. You lie down out of respect for the idea of rest, and then you get up and go find the plan and walk it one more time, the way you might walk the perimeter of a house you were responsible for keeping standing. I had the operation spread across 2 folding tables, not on a screen. On paper, because paper does not refresh and reroute and pretend the last version was never there. Imagery on the left, the timeline down the center, the contingencies on the right in the order I trusted them, which was not always the order the doctrine wanted. I read the secondary breach again. I read page 11 again. I had read page 11 so many times that I could have recited it, and I read it again anyway, because the day you stop rereading the page that matters is the day it stops being true. Sergeant Major Glenn Whitaker came in around 3:30 with 2 cups of coffee that were actually hot, which on a staging base at that hour is a small miracle a good sergeant major knows how to perform. He set one down beside my imagery and did not say anything for a while, which is one of the reasons he was the best soldier I had ever served with. He had 28 years in. He had buried more friends than most people meet. When he finally spoke, He was not looking at me. He was looking at the timeline. "You built it, ma'am," he said. "You don't have to prove it to a captain with a laser pointer." I looked up at him. "Who says there's a captain?" "There's always a captain," he said. "There's a captain in every room you've ever walked into that didn't already know your name. You've spent 22 years being the person who wrote the thing the loud man reads. I've watched you do it. I've watched you let them." I did not answer that because it was true, and there is nothing to say to a true thing at 3:30 in the morning except to drink the coffee the man who said it brought you. Here is what the captain could not have known standing at his podium, because the uniform does not tell you, and I was not going to. I was a lieutenant colonel. I had been commissioned in the year 2004, a second lieutenant at 22, and I had spent the 22 years since then learning the one part of this work that never gets a thumbnail or a headline, which is the building of the thing. I was an operational planner. I had come up writing the operations that other people carried into the dark, and I had gotten good enough at it that the higher headquarters, planning this one, had asked for me by name and then given me command of the ground force that would execute what I wrote, author and commander both. It does not happen often. It had happened here because the operation was hard and the margin was thin, and someone above me had decided they wanted the person who would fly it to be the same person who had bled over every timing on the page. None of that was visible in a utility uniform at 5:40 in the morning. That is the truth about competence that no one tells you when you are young. It is quiet. It does not announce itself. It looks from the outside exactly like a woman filling an urn. Whitaker finished his coffee and stood. "Wheels turn at 6, he said. "You'll be at the front by then." He said it like a fact, not a hope, because he had watched me arrive at the front of 100 rooms the long way around, and he had stopped worrying about whether I would get there. I walked the flight line at dawn before I went to the theater. I do that too, when I can. The aircraft sat in the gray light with their ramps down and their crews moving around them in the slow, exact way of people who have done a dangerous thing so many times it has become ordinary. I stood at the edge of the apron and I thought about the fact that in a few hours those aircraft would carry people into a place I had drawn on a map, on a plan I had signed, and that some of them were trusting the plan without ever knowing whose hands had made it. That is the weight. It is not rank. Rank is a thing you wear. The weight is other people's lives resting on a page you were responsible for getting right, and it does not come off when you take the uniform off. I looked at the aircraft the way you look at a promise you fully intend to keep, and then I went to fill the coffee. People think planning is a desk job, and they say it the way they say a lot of things they have not looked at closely. They picture slides and coffee, and a room that is warm and safe while other people are cold and in danger. Some of that is true. The room is warm. But the work is the opposite of safe, because the work is where you decide, weeks in advance and with no one watching, which door a 19-year-old will go through and whether it will hold. You make those decisions alone in the specific quiet of 3 in the morning, and then you carry them by yourself until the night they come true. And if you have done it right, no one ever knows your name, because the plans that work are invisible, and only the plans that fail get investigated. I had chosen that. I want to be honest that I had chosen it. Somewhere in my 20s, I had decided I would rather be the person who got the plan right than the person who got the photograph, and for a long time, that felt like a clean, adult decision, the decision of a serious person. It took me a lot longer to see the crack in it, which is that the same choice that keeps you humble can quietly teach a whole institution that the person in the back of the room does not matter, and then the institution starts believing it, and then one day, the institution hands the coffee to the wrong person and does not even feel it happen. Whitaker knew all of that. He had watched me make the choice and live inside it for years. When he told me I did not have to prove anything to a captain with a laser pointer, he was not talking about the captain. He was talking about me, and the thing I did in rooms, and the way I had made a virtue out of a habit that had started as humility and hardened into something closer to hiding. This was not the first time a room had decided I was the help. It was not even the first time it had cost something. The first time it truly cost something was 10 years earlier in a forward operations center on the far side of the world in the year 2016 when I was a major of 34, and I still believed, somewhere under the discipline, that if you did the work well enough, the credit would find you the way water finds the low ground. I had written a valley operation that year, a hard target, a bad approach, a front door that everyone wanted to use because it was obvious and fast. I did not trust the front door, so I built a secondary breach, a harder way in that depended on a small team getting to a place no one would expect and holding it for 90 seconds while the assault shifted. I put the secondary breach on page 11 of the plan, and I briefed it quietly, and most of the room let their eyes slide past it the way rooms do with the parts of a plan they hope not to need. One man did not let his eyes slide past it. His name was Jonah Keller. He was a sergeant first class, my team sergeant, 31 years old, and he was the kind of soldier who read the whole plan, including the pages the officers skimmed. He came and found me the night before, and he had the plan folded open to page 11, and he tapped it with 2 fingers. "Page 11, ma'am," he said. I read it twice. "If the front door's wrong, we take your door." "It's a hard door, Jonah," I said. "They're all hard doors," he said. "Yours is just the one that works." He grinned when he said it. He had a way of making the worst news in the world sound like a thing you could carry together. The front door was wrong. It went wrong exactly the way I had been afraid it would. And when it did, Jonah Keller took my door. He got his team to the place no one expected, and he held it, and the assault shifted through the gap he made, and every man who went in behind him came out. Jonah did not come out. He held the door for the 90 seconds it needed to be held, and the last of those seconds cost him his life. And the operation that succeeded because of page 11 became, in the telling, a success that belonged to everyone, and therefore to no one in particular. I have thought a great deal, in the 10 years since, about how credit moves. It moves upward, and it moves toward the confident, and it settles on whoever is standing in the warm part of the room when the good news arrives. When the after-action was briefed, a major named Curtis Vaughn stood in the warm part of the room. He had carried the plan up the chain, which is a real job, and he was charming, which is a real skill. And when the seniors turned their approval on the operation, he did not step out of the light and say the plan came from a captain in the planning cell. He said, "The team did tremendous work. Tremendous." And the word team did what that word always does. It spread the credit so thin that it disappeared, and my name went with it. I did not fight it. I want to be honest about that, because the honesty is the whole point. I told myself the work was the reward. I told myself Jonah would not have cared about a name on a page. Both of those things were partly true, and I used them the way you use a splint, to keep walking on something that was actually broken. What I did not do for 10 years was make sure the record was right. Jonah's Valor packet stalled in staffing, the way packets do when no senior officer is angry enough to push them. And I was not angry. I was disciplined. I had confused the two, and it took me 10 years and a captain and a coffee urn to understand that discipline that lets the truth stay buried is not discipline at all. It is just a quieter way of agreeing with the room. I should tell you about Jonah, because otherwise he is just a name that dies on page 11, and that is exactly the thing I'm trying to stop doing. He was 31 that year. He had a wife named Renata and a daughter who drew him pictures of the aircraft he flew in, badly and with great confidence, and he taped every one of them inside his kit so that the inside of his gear looked like a refrigerator door. He was the best team sergeant I ever worked with, and the reason was not tactical, though he was excellent at the tactics. The reason was that he read. He read the whole plan. In 15 years, I have met perhaps a handful of soldiers who actually read the whole plan, all of it, including the pages the confident men skim, because the confident men have already decided how the night will go. Jonah read the pages the confident men skimmed, and he found the parts that mattered, and he trusted them, and he made me trust them too by the simple act of taking them seriously. The night before the Valley, when he came and found me with the plan folded open to page 11, he did not come to complain, and he did not come to be reassured. He came to tell me he had read it, and he was going to bet his life on it, and he wanted me to know he had chosen the bet with his eyes open. That is a thing very few people ever give you, the knowledge that someone has looked at your work all the way to the bottom and decided to trust it anyway. He gave me that, and then he went and made it true, and the making of it true was the last thing he did. For 10 years, I told myself that Jonah would not have cared about a citation, that he was not a man who did the work for the ribbon. That was true. And it was also a way of using his own decency as an excuse for my failure to fight for him. He did not do the work for the ribbon. That is precisely why someone else had to make sure the ribbon came. And the someone was me. And I did not, for 10 years. And I dressed the not doing up in the language of discipline until a captain in a briefing theater accidentally showed me what my discipline had actually been protecting, which was my own comfort. At 5:58, the secure radio on the side console came alive, and the morning turned. I had been watching that clock the way you watch a kettle you know is about to boil. The theater was full by then. Officers and senior enlisted filled the rows, the staff who had planned the supporting pieces, the air crews, the men and women who would fly the thing. Captain Tarrant stood at the podium, clicking through his opening slides, comfortable now. The room the coffee handled, the unfamiliar woman, safely stationed at the back where he had put her. I had not left. He had told me to wait outside. I had decided, quietly, that I would wait inside, at the back, by the radio, because I knew what the radio was going to say. The radio said it at 5:58. A voice came through the small speaker, filtered and flattened, the way voices are on a secure net, but I would have known it in my sleep. It was Colonel Nathan Reed, the task force commander, calling from the operations center across the base. "Staging! This is the task force commander," the radio said. "Is your briefer in the room? We are holding at 0600 hours for Talon Actual." There is a particular silence that happens when a room hears a thing it was not expecting and does not yet understand. It is not the silence of comprehension. It is the silence just before it, the half-second where everyone reaches for the meaning at the same time. Talon. The room heard a call sign and did not know whose it was. I knew whose it was. Talon had been my call sign for 6 years. It had been my call sign since the day I took command of the task unit, and before that it had belonged to the officer who trained me, and before that to the one who trained him, and a call sign that gets handed down like that stops being a name and becomes a kind of inheritance. The captain at the podium did not know any of this. He heard the radio ask for the briefer, and he did the natural thing, the thing his picture of the morning required. He reached for the handset, and he looked around the room for the colonel he assumed the voice was asking for. He looked at the front rows. He looked at the senior officers in their seats. He looked at the door as if Talon Actual might walk through it at the last second, a properly ranked person to match the properly serious voice. He did not look at the back table. Of course he did not. The woman at the back table filled the coffee. I set down the paper cup I was holding. I crossed the room to the console. I did it without hurry, the same way I had filled the urn, because hurry is an argument, and I still was not arguing. I reached past Captain Terrence's outstretched hand, and I picked up the handset, and I saw him turn toward me with the beginning of a correction on his face, the reflex of a man about to tell the support to put down the equipment she does not understand. I keyed the handset. "Task Force, this is Talon Actual," I said. "Briefer is in the room, ready in 2. Colonel Reed's voice came back, warm under the filtering, the voice of a man who had worked with me for years and was glad to hear me. "Good copy, Talon. The task force is holding for you, whenever you're set." I set the handset back in its cradle. The captain's hand was still half raised, halfway to the radio he had been about to take from me, and it stopped there. And for the first time that morning, at 2 minutes to 6, Captain Wesley Tarrant actually looked at me. He looked at my face, and then, the way you look for something you should have checked an hour ago, he looked at the sewn rank on my chest, the low contrast thread you have to actually read. I watched him read it. I watched the picture he had built of the morning come apart behind his eyes, slide by slide, the whole confident construction of who belonged where, undone by 2 words on a radio, and the fact that they were mine. I did not say anything to him. I had a mission to brief. But I let myself look at him for 1 full second, long enough for him to understand that I had heard every word he said, and then I walked to the front of the room I had been told to wait outside of. Between the radio and the podium, in the space of a few steps, I already knew the 2 doors the day was going to offer me, because they are the same 2 doors the institution always offers a person who has just been proven right in front of a crowd. I did not have to guess. They arrived, both of them, in the hour that followed, from people who meant well, which is the thing about easy wrong doors. They are almost never offered by villains. They are offered by decent people who want the morning to be smooth. The first door came from a staff officer in the anteroom, a lieutenant colonel from the higher headquarters who had seen the whole thing and wanted very sincerely to make it disappear. He caught me in the few minutes before I stepped up, and he leaned in with the low voice people use for doing you a favor. "Ma'am," he said, "cleanest thing here is we never mention it. Captain Tarrant made a mistake, he knows it. The room knows it. Let him keep his morning, no paperwork, no scene. We move on." It was a reasonable thing to say. It was also, if you turned it over, a request that I do the exact thing I had done for 10 years. Swallow it. Let the room's version stand, because standing it was tidier than correcting it. Keep the peace by keeping quiet. I had kept a great deal of peace that way, and I could show you the cost of it, and the cost had a name, and the name was Jonah Keller, whose packet was still sitting in a queue because no one had been willing to make a scene about it. The second door came later, from the other direction, and it was colder and, if I am honest, more tempting. A senior officer who was fond of me and did not like Tarrant offered, almost as a gift, to have the captain relieved by the end of the day. One phone call, a young officer who had insulted a commander in front of her own operation, gone by nightfall. It would have been clean. It would have been, in a narrow sense, just. I stood in the anteroom with both doors open in front of me, and I understood something I wish I had understood at 34. Both doors ended in the same place. Both of them made the morning about me instead of about what the morning had actually revealed. The first door asked me to disappear, again. The second door let me disappear a man to feel even, which is only disappearing with the direction reversed. Neither door touched the real thing, which was not the captain at all. The real thing was a habit, mine and the institution's both, of deciding who counts by how they look in a doorway, and then never checking. I appreciate it, I told the officer who offered the phone call. I'm not going to spend a captain to feel better about a coffee urn. He humiliated you, ma'am. No, I said. He underestimated me. That's a different injury, and the treatment is different too. I thanked them both, and I closed both doors, and I went to give my brief, because underneath the two easy doors there was a harder one, and I had already decided to walk through it. I have watched a lot of good people take the first door. It is the door that looks like maturity. You tell yourself you are being the bigger person, that you are protecting unit cohesion, that a fuss would be beneath you, and every one of those things can be true, and the door can still be a trap because the first door is where injustice goes to be quietly filed, and the people who benefit from the filing are never the ones who were wronged. The room that hands the coffee to the wrong person has a deep, sincere interest in never having to talk about it, and it will offer you every noble-sounding reason to help it move on. I had accepted that offer for most of my career. I knew its face very well. The second door is more honest about what it is, which almost makes it worse. It does not pretend to be maturity. It offers you a clean strike, a career for a career, and it hands you the knife handle first and calls it justice. And it is seductive precisely because you have earned it. Because the man really did wrong you, because for once you could make the person who dismissed you feel exactly what dismissal costs. I stood there, and I felt how much I wanted it, and I made myself look at where it led, and where it led was a version of me who had finally learned to use her power the way it had been used against her. That was not a version of me I was willing to become over a coffee urn or over anything. The harder door was this. I would give the brief as though the coffee had never happened, because the operation was bigger than my morning and the people flying it deserved my whole attention. And then, after, on my own time and in my own way, I would do the two things the easy doors were designed to keep me from doing. I would correct the captain in a way that taught him something instead of ending him. And I would finally, 10 years too late, make the record right for Jonah Keller. I found a minute with Sergeant Major Whitaker before I stepped to the podium. He had watched the radio, watched the walk, and he had the expression he gets when a thing he predicted comes true and gives him no pleasure to have predicted. You want him relieved, Whitaker said. It was not a question. He was testing me. No. Good. He looked at the captain, who was sitting in the front row now, very still, in the posture of a man who has just learned the size of his own mistake and does not know where to put his hands. Don't waste him, ma'am, Whitaker said. Spend him. I have carried that sentence a long way since. Do not waste him. Spend him. There is a difference between destroying a person and using the worst moment of his young career to make him into something better. And the difference is the whole of what I believe about leadership. A wasted captain is a story you tell at dinner. A spent captain is a better officer for 30 years, and every soldier he leads after this is a little safer for the morning he got wrong. I looked out at the room. The confidence had drained out of it, replaced by the alert, slightly ashamed attention of a group of people who have just watched themselves get something badly wrong and are waiting to see what the person they got wrong will do about it. I could feel them bracing for the scene. Every one of them, including the ones who had smiled into their cups, was ready for me to make them pay a little for the pleasure of the correction. That is what a room expects. That is what a room, in its guilt, almost wants, because a scene would let them off the hook. A scene would make it about my temper instead of their assumption. I was not going to give them the scene. I clicked to slide 1. It was my slide. It had been my slide for 6 weeks. Good morning, I said. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Brennan. I wrote this operation, and I'll be commanding the ground force. Let's walk it, and then let's go bring everybody home. And I began. There's a thing that happens in your chest when you decide to stop hiding, and it is not triumph. It is closer to grief, because the decision means admitting that all the years of hiding were a choice and not a fate, that you could have stood at the front of 100 earlier rooms and simply did not. I felt that as I clicked to slide 1. I felt the weight of every room I had let decide I was the help, every plan I had handed up without my name on it, Every time I had called my disappearing act humility and believed it. You do not get those rooms back. You only get the next one. This was the next one, and I had decided, somewhere between the radio and the podium, that I was going to be visible in it. Not for my sake, but because a lieutenant colonel who hides teaches every soldier under her that hiding is what excellence looks like, and I was done teaching that. The work deserved a face, Jonah's door deserved a name, and the 23-year-olds coming up behind me deserved to see a woman stand next to her own work as though she had every right to, because she did, and so do they. I have briefed a great many operations, and I can tell you that the room always knows inside the first 2 minutes whether the person at the podium actually built the thing or is only reading it. There is a tell. A person reading a plan pauses at the transitions, glances down to find the next slide, lets the deck lead. A person who built the plan does not need the deck at all. The deck is a courtesy to the room. The plan lives somewhere behind the sternum, and it comes out in order because it went in order over months, one hard decision at a time. I did not look at the deck. I walked the operation from the front of the room with my hands quiet at my sides, and I told them how it would go, the infiltration windows and why they were what they were, the approach, and the 3 reasons I had rejected the 2 faster ones, the actions on the objective, the timeline down to the minute, the way the pieces would hand off to each other in the dark. I spelled out the numbers the way you have to when lives hang on them being heard correctly, so that 13 minutes was 13 minutes and not 30, so that grid and time and call sign left no room for the kind of small confusion that gets people killed. And then I got to page 11. If the primary breach fails, I said, we do not surge the assault into a bad door. We shift to the secondary. It is harder. It asks a small team to get to a place no one will be looking and hold it for 90 seconds while the assault moves through the gap. 90 seconds is a long time in that spot. We are going to rehearse it until it is the most boring thing any of you have ever done, because the boring version is the one where everybody comes home. I did not tell them where page 11 came from. I did not tell them about a valley 10 years earlier, or about a sergeant first class who read the whole plan when everyone else skimmed, or about 90 seconds that had already been paid for once. That was not their weight to carry into the aircraft. But I felt it in the room. I felt myself telling them with total certainty about a door I knew worked because a man I loved had proven it worked with his life, and I kept my voice level because the discipline that had failed Jonah for 10 years could at least do this one thing right and get his door briefed clean. Halfway through, the radio confirmed what the room had been slow to understand. Colonel Reed came up on the net from the operations center, checking a decision point, and he did what he had done for years. He deferred to me by call sign in front of all of them. Talon Actual, your call on the infiltration window, the radio said. The task force will take your read. Task force, Talon, I said. We hold the window. If the weather turns, we slip right by 20 minutes, not left. I don't want them arriving early into a set that isn't ready. Good copy, Talon. Your call all the way. Your call all the way. There is no rank insignia in the world that says what those 4 words say. A colonel commanding the whole task force on an open net, telling a room full of officers that the woman one of them had sent for coffee, held the operation in her hands, and he trusted her to hold it. I did not turn around to see the room absorb it. I had a mission to fly, but I heard it. A room changes its posture when it understands, and you can hear the change even with your back to it. The small shifts of people sitting differently, the particular quiet of a group of professionals recalibrating around the truth. Captain Terrence sat in the front row through all of it, and I could see him because he was in front of me. And so I watched, without meaning to, the thing the title of the story is about. I watched him go pale. It happened slowly, over the length of the brief, not the fast flush of embarrassment, but the slower drain of a man doing the arithmetic. The unfamiliar woman he told to fetch coffee had written the operation. She commanded the ground force. The task force commander called her by a call sign the whole community knew. Every one of those facts landed on him a beat apart, and I watched the color leave his face one fact at a time, until somewhere around the middle of the brief, he sat down a little harder in his chair, the way a man sits when his legs have quietly stopped volunteering to hold him up, and he did not move again until I was done. I did not enjoy it. I want to be clear about that, because there is a version of this story where the pale captain is the payoff, where the whole point is the pleasure of watching a certain man come undone. That is not the story I lived. Watching Wesley Tarrant understand the size of his mistake gave me nothing, because it did not give me back the 10 years, or the packet, or the door in the valley, or the man who held it. It was just a young officer learning in the worst possible way that you do not know who is in the room until you have actually looked. I have learned harder lessons in worse ways. I did not need to gloat over his. I finished the brief. I asked for questions. There were a few good ones, about the secondary breach and the weather call, and I answered them the way you answer questions from people you are about to trust with your plan, fully and without condescension. Captain Tarrant did not ask a question. He had only one question in him, and it was not a question you can ask in a briefing room, and we both knew it. I closed the deck. "Wheels up on my timeline," I said. "Rehearse the boring version until you hate it. Then let's go bring them home." The room stood as I gathered my notes, and it was not the theatrical coming to attention of a movie. It was quieter, and it meant more. It was a room of professionals standing, because the person who built the thing they were about to risk their lives on had just shown them exactly how much she was worth, and standing was the only honest thing left to do. I should tell you what a room does when it recalibrates, because it is one of the strange privileges of standing at the front. When I began, the attention in the room was the wary, braced attention of people waiting for a scene. By the time I reached the actions on the objective, it had changed into something else. The forward-leaning attention of professionals who have realized the person in front of them actually knows the thing cold, and are now listening to learn rather than listening to judge. You can feel the exact moment it turns. It is like a change in air pressure. The room stops watching you and starts watching the plan, which is the only thing I ever wanted a room to do, and it is a thing that a woman in a worn uniform almost never gets handed for free. I had to earn it in front of them in real time, which is fine. I have always had to earn it in front of them in real time. The difference this morning was only that they had watched themselves get me wrong first, so the earning had a witness. There is a temptation in that moment to reach for the insult and use it, to pause the brief and say something about coffee. The room would have laughed nervously, and it would have felt, for a second, like a victory. I didn't do it, and not because I am a saint. I did not do it because the second you use the brief to settle a score, you have told the room that the score matters more than the mission. And the mission was going to put people in the dark in a few hours, and it deserved a briefer whose whole attention was on bringing them back. The insult was mine to carry. The mission was theirs to fly. I was not going to spend one on the other. He was waiting for me in the hallway outside the theater. I had expected him to avoid me. It said something for him that he did not. Captain Tarrant stood against the wall near the door, with his cover in his hands, turning it slowly, and when I came out he straightened and faced me, and he did not reach for an excuse, which was the first thing he did all morning that I respected. "Ma'am," he said, "I don't have an excuse." "I know," I said. "That's the first useful thing you've said all morning." He flinched at that, but he held. I let the hallway be quiet for a moment. People move past us on their way out, giving us the wide berth. People give a conversation they can tell is not for them. "Do you know what you actually did wrong?" I asked him. "I told a lieutenant colonel to get the coffee." "No," I said. "That's what you're embarrassed about. It's not what you did wrong. You'd have been just as wrong if I really had been the support staff. The person you told to fetch coffee and wait outside, in the version of this morning where I'm exactly who you thought I was a soldier who got up before you did to make your room work. You didn't insult a colonel, Captain. You insulted whoever was standing there, and you did it without looking, and the only reason it stings is that this time, the whoever turned out to outrank you. That should scare you more than the rank did." He was quiet for a long moment. To his credit, he did not argue. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "It does." "Good. Then here's what you're going to do. You're not getting relieved. I turned that down twice this morning. You're going to be a better officer than you were at 0540, and you're going to start by never again deciding who someone is by what they're wearing in a doorway. Now go be better than this. I have an operation to run." That was the whole correction. No paperwork, no scene, a hallway, a cover turning in a young man's hands, in a sentence he would carry for 30 years. I have seen careers ended for less, and I have seen nothing learned in the ending. I would rather spend a captain than waste one. Neil Barrett, the lieutenant who had laughed, found me an hour later in the operation cell. He was younger than Tarrant, and it had cost him more to come, I think, because a lieutenant who laughs along has less to hide behind than a captain who gives an order. "Mom," he said. I laughed. This morning, when the captain said the thing about the coffee, I laughed because everyone laughed, and that's not a reason, and I'm sorry. "No," I agreed. "It isn't a reason. Do you know why I'm going to remember that you came and said this?" "No, ma'am." Because the laugh is the easy part and the apology is the hard part, and most people only ever do the easy part. You did the hard one on your own, without being made to. That's rarer than you think in this building. Don't lose it." He left standing a little straighter, and I meant every word, because the room is built out of the Neil Barretts, the ones who laugh along and could learn not to, and you do not fix a room by breaking the certain captain. You fix it by keeping the honest lieutenant. Then I did the thing I had been putting off for 10 years. I pulled Jonah Keller's file. The Valor packet was exactly where I knew it would be, which is to say nowhere, stalled in a queue in a system that only ever moves for people who are angry enough to move it. I had not been angry for 10 years. I had been disciplined, which I have already told you is not the same thing, and the packet had paid the price of my discipline the whole time. As I opened it, I found the old fingerprints on the case, and one of them belonged to Curtis Vaughn, whose confident narration in a warm room 10 years earlier had helped turn a specific man's specific courage into the general excellence of the team. I could have gone after Vaughn. It would have been easy, and a small, mean part of me wanted to. The same part that had been offered a captain's career that morning and turned it down. But burning Vaughn would not put Jonah's citation on paper, it would only put my anger there, and anger is not the same as a record, and Jonah deserved a record. So I routed the correction through the living instead of through the guilty. I reopened the packet. I attached my own statement, the one I should have written in 2016, the one that said, in plain language, whose door the assault had taken and what it had cost the man who held it. I signed it, and I made 2 phone calls to make sure that this time it would move, because this time there was a lieutenant colonel who was, at last, angry enough on the right person's behalf to make it move. Then the operation launched, on my timeline, and the net went quiet the way goodnights go quiet, and I sat in the operation cell in the dark with a headset on, and listened to my plan carry other people's children into the dark, and, hours later, carry all of them back out. I want to say something about Curtis Vaughn, because he is the easiest person in this story to hate, and hating him would be the laziest thing I could do with him. Vaughn was not a monster. He was a charming, capable officer who, in a warm room 10 years ago, was offered credit that was not entirely his and did not have the character to correct the room. That is a small failure. It is the smallest failure in this whole story. But small failures, left uncorrected, compound like interest, and the interest on Vaughn's small failure was paid by a dead man's widow for 10 years in the form of a citation that never came. That is the thing I most want you to understand about how injustice actually works. It is rarely a villain. It is usually a decent person in a warm room who lets a wrong thing stand because correcting it would be awkward, and then 1,000 other decent people who let it keep standing for the same reason until the wrong thing is just the way the record reads and everyone has forgotten it was ever a choice. I did not call Vaughn. I thought about it, and I understood that a phone call to Vaughn would be for me, not for Jonah. What Jonah needed was not Vaughn's shame. What Jonah needed was his name on a piece of paper, correctly at last, and Vaughn's shame would not put it there. So I spent the afternoon doing the unglamorous work that should have been done a decade ago. I wrote the statement. I found the 2 people in the system who could still move the packet, and I made them care by carrying loudly at them, which is a skill I had refused to use on my own behalf for 22 years and discovered I was quite good at the moment it was for someone else. The record does not move for the humble. I had been wrong about that my whole career. The record moves for the person who is willing to be a nuisance about the truth, and I had finally found a truth I was willing to be a nuisance about. They all came home. I want to say that plainly before I say anything about the cost, because the cost only means what it means if you know the operation worked. The primary breach held as it happened, so the secondary was never needed, and there is a particular ache in rehearsing a door until you hate it and then never opening it. But that is the job. You build the hard door so that it is there, and the best nights are the ones where it stays closed, and Jonah's door stayed closed that night, and every man and woman I sent out came back through the front one. I sat in the operations cell until the last aircraft was down and the last head was counted, and then I went to my quarters, and I did the thing I had not done in 10 years. I keep a photograph of Jonah Keller in my kit. I have kept it face down for a long time. That is not an accident, and it was never really about grief, or not only about grief. A photograph you keep face down is a photograph you have decided not to answer to. I had kept his face turned away because his face asked a question I had spent 10 years refusing, which was, "Why is my name not on the paper, ma'am, when you know exactly what I did?" I took the photograph out and I set it upright on the desk, facing my chair, and I let it ask. Major Delia Groves found me like that. Delia had been my friend for 15 years, since we were both captains who did not yet know how the credit moved, and she is the one person I let see me when the discipline is off. She had heard about the morning, the way everyone had heard about the morning, and she came by with the particular quiet of a friend who is not going to congratulate you on the thing everyone else is congratulating you on, because she knows it is not the thing. She looked at the photograph. She knew who it was. She sat down across from me, and she did not reach for anything comforting, which is why I keep her. "You got the record fixed, Paige," she said. "You did not get him back." "No," I said. I did not get him back. Standing at that podium today, all of it. Read on the net, the captain going gray, the room standing up. She watched me. "Tell me the truth. What did it feel like?" I thought about it, because she deserved a true answer and because I wanted to know myself. "It felt like almost nothing," I said. "It felt about the weight of the paper cup I was told to fill. The one person I wanted in that room has been gone since 2016, and no amount of a room standing up is going to seat him in it." Delia nodded. She had known that was the answer before she asked. She asked so that I would have to hear myself say it, which is the other thing friends are for. "Here's what I've been trying to understand," I told her. "For 10 years I thought the wound was that they didn't see me. Vaughn in the warm room, the packet stalled, the names spread thin into the team. I thought if I could just get the record right, get seen, it would close." I turned the photograph a few degrees so Jonah was looking at the part of the desk where the work actually got done, at the imagery and the timelines, and not at me. But that was never the wound. Being unseen didn't cost me anything I couldn't live without. What it cost was him. My discipline about my own name was fine. My discipline about his name is the thing I have to live with. I let the work speak for itself, and the work does not speak. The work needs someone angry enough to make it speak, and I wasn't for 10 years, and he paid the interest on that the whole time. "You were angry today?" Delia said. "I was angry today," I said. "It only took a captain and a coffee urn." We sat with that for a while. Outside, the base was doing the thing a base does after an operation. The slow exhale, the vehicles moving people back to their racks, the light coming up gray again over the flight line where I had stood the morning before and looked at the aircraft like a promise. The work was whole. It had always been whole. The Valley operation had worked. This one had worked. Page 11 was sound both times. What had never been whole was me, standing next to the work, letting my name and Jonah's name be attached to the thing our hands had made. I had confused humility with disappearing. They are not the same. Humility is doing the work and not needing the applause. Disappearing is doing the work and then helping the room forget you did it, and helping it forget the man who died doing it with you. "So what changes?" Delia said. It was the right question. It is always the right question. "I stopped disappearing," I said. "Not for me. I genuinely do not care whether a room knows my name, but there is always a next person standing at the back table with a coffee urn, and if I keep teaching rooms that the person at the back table is furniture, then the next Jonah's plan gets briefed by someone who took the credit, and the next Jonah's packet stalls in a queue, and I will have spent a whole career being excellent and unseen and calling it virtue, while the bill went to other people." Delia stayed a while longer, and then she left, and I sat with the photograph upright for the first time in 10 years. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel healed. I felt something quieter and more durable than either, which was the specific piece of a person who has finally stopped lying to herself about the difference between being right and being whole. I had been right for 10 years. I was only now, at 44, in a gray dawn after a good night, beginning to be whole. Before she left, Delia said one more thing, and it is the thing I have kept from that night. She was at the door, and she looked back at the photograph standing upright on the desk, and she said, "He knew, you know. Whatever the paper said or didn't say, Jonah knew whose door he took. You didn't leave him unseen. You left him unrecorded. Those aren't the same, and the second one you can still fix." Then she left me to it. She was right on both counts. Jonah had known. He had folded the plan open to page 11 and tapped it with 2 fingers and grinned at me, and in that moment he had seen me completely, more completely than any room full of standing officers ever would. Being seen was never the thing I had failed to give him. The record was. And the record, as Delia said, I could still fix, which is more than you can say about most of the things that keep a person awake at 3 a.m. The record moved. It took a few weeks and 2 more phone calls, and one conversation with a colonel who remembered the valley and was glad, in the end, to sign the thing he should have signed a decade before. Jonah Keller's citation cleared the gate it had been stuck behind since 2016. His widow got a phone call that was 10 years late, and I will not pretend a phone call closes a grave, but I will tell you that Neil Barrett, the lieutenant who had laughed and then apologized, was the one I had make it. Because a young officer who learns early what a citation actually costs is a young officer who will never let one stall in a queue on his watch. Spend them, Whitaker had said. I was learning to spend the right ones on the right things. But the part of this I keep, the part that closed the morning for me, happened a few weeks later in the operations cell on an ordinary afternoon with no operation running. There was a second lieutenant in the planning cell named Bethany Cross, 23 years old, sharp in the way that has not yet learned to defend itself, the kind of young officer who does excellent work and then hands it up as though it belongs to the air. I had been watching her for a month. I knew the type because I had been the type. I watched her build a piece of a plan that was genuinely good, better than good, a routing solution that 3 more experienced planners had missed, and I watched her put it in the folder without her name on it, under the neutral gray heading that says the planning cell produced this, that no one in particular produced this, that it simply appeared. I picked up the folder and I looked at the routing solution and I looked at her. "Whose is this?" I said. "It's just the planning cell's product, ma'am," she said. "No," I said. "It's yours. You found the thing 3 majors missed. Put your name on it." She looked at me the way I must have looked at people once when they told me the same thing and I did not believe them. "It doesn't really matter whose it is," she said, "as long as it works." I sat down across from her, the way Delia had sat down across from me, and I told her the truth I had taken 22 years and a coffee urn to learn. "It matters," I said. "Not because you need the credit. You don't, and the day you start doing it for the credit, you'll do it worse. It matters because the work does not speak for itself. It never has. Somebody has to stand next to it. And if the good people refuse to stand next to their own work out of some idea that standing next to it is unseemly, then the only people standing next to work are the ones who didn't do it. You put your name on the thing you made, Lieutenant, so that the record is true. A true record is not vanity. A true record is how the next person who reads it learns who to trust." She was quiet for a moment. "Did somebody tell you that, ma'am?" "No," I said. "That's the problem. Nobody told me, and I spent a decade learning it the expensive way. I'm telling you now so you can skip that part." I slid the folder back across to her. "Sign it. And the next time somebody hands you a coffee pot in a room you built, you put the pot down and you walk to the front and you brief your own work. You don't have to be rude about it. You just have to stop helping them be wrong about you." She signed it. It was a small thing. It was the whole thing. Across the cell, Captain Wesley Tarrant was working at a terminal, quietly, heads down, no laser pointer, no room to own. He had asked, a week after the brief, to be assigned to my cell, which had surprised me, and I had said yes, which had surprised him. He was becoming, slowly, a genuinely good officer, the kind who reads the whole plan, including the pages everyone skims. And I noticed that afternoon that when a young sergeant came into the cell with a question, unsure whether she was in the right place, Terrence stopped what he was doing and looked at her, actually looked at her, before he answered. Mercy had worked. The captain I did not waste had become a captain worth keeping, and he had learned the one lesson I most needed him to learn, which is that you find out who is in the room by looking. I watched a 23-year-old lieutenant sign her own work, and I watched a captain look up before he spoke, and I felt the morning finally close. Not because I had won it, because it had been spent, all of it, the insult and the radio and the pale face and the 10 years late citation, spent on the only thing worth buying with it, which was a planning cell where the next quiet person to build something good would have her name on it, and a room a little less likely to hand the coffee to the person who wrote the plan. I think often about the fact that the whole correction cost me almost nothing and would have cost me almost nothing at any point in the previous 10 years. The statement took an afternoon. The phone calls took an hour. The conversation with Lieutenant Cross took 10 minutes. None of it was hard. That is the part that is difficult to sit with. The thing I had told myself for a decade was too complicated, too political, too likely to make waves, turned out to be an afternoon of ordinary work I had simply refused to do because doing it meant standing next to my own worth, and I had trained myself out of standing next to anything. The captain did me a strange favor in the end. He was so completely, publicly wrong about who I was that he made it impossible for me to keep being quietly wrong about it myself. So here is the one thing I know now, and I am telling it to you, whoever you are, Because I suspect some of you have stood at a back table with a coffee urn in a room you built. If someone tells you to fetch the coffee in a room you built, you do not have to argue. You do not have to raise your voice or flash what you are or make them pay for the pleasure of being wrong about you. Arguing is what you do when you are not sure the truth will hold on its own. The truth holds on its own. It is the most patient thing there is. Put the pot down, walk to the front, sign your work, and stand next to it. Not for the applause, because the applause weighs about as much as a paper cup, and I can promise you that the day a room finally stands up for you, the person you most want to see it will probably not be there. Do it because the record has to be true, and a true record is how the next person learns who to trust. And because there is always a next person at the back table, and the way you carry your own worth is the lesson she learns about hers. The truth comes back through the door it was carried out of. It came back for me through a radio, 10 years and 1 coffee urn late, and it will come back for you too, in its own time, and probably not the way you pictured. Your only job is to still be standing there when it does. Stand where you can see the door, do the work, and let your name stay on it. And when it is your turn to be the one at the front of the room, the one who decides who counts, be the one who actually looks, that is all of it. That is the whole thing I have. Keep your work honest, keep your name on it, and look at the people in your doorways. The rest takes care of itself, in the patient way the truth has, and you only have to be standing tall enough to meet it.